Well, hello.
Hi, how's it going?
It's going pretty well. I am excited about today's topic because we're going to be talking. This is the first of a three-part series we're calling The Sacred Feminine, Presence, Power, and Pleasure. And today we're going to talk about presence, which is more about the origins, archetypes, basis for this idea of the divine feminine or the sacred feminine. And I have a lot of passion for this topic, so I can't wait to dive in.
Right on, right on. I always joke, like, I love men. I love men. I've met over the last few years some remarkable, amazing, can't get enough of a men, but I don't want to be one. I'm so grateful to be a woman. I know it sounds silly. So,
No, I think
just,
well, let's start with that because I think that there are a few misconceptions, in my opinion, about the topics that we're going to be covering over the next couple of episodes. And one of them is that somehow modern feminism has rewritten history or is attempting to rewrite history by bringing to the forefront, you know, either Gnostic gospels or other, documentation from the past where women were featured more heavily in terms of a sacred or divine role. And that in essence, it's being fabricated or overemphasized. And I think that the whole goal here is to just talk about, most of the references or support for this idea have been kind of systematically eradicated from, the main canon in terms of, especially Western religions, but overall in a lot of cultures. So we're going to talk a lot about some examples of how the feminine divine used to be represented and how that's been resurfaced probably over the last, 50, 60, 70 years as modern feminism has unearthed a few of these, ancient examples for us.
yeah.
Is that a good way to think of it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I also think of it as being feminine. I am divine in a way that is unique to woman. And
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't matter what canon says, it doesn't matter what politics. I still have that. I live that out every single day. And nobody can take that as long as I don't give it away. I can only give it away, which I'm not going to do, right? Nobody can take it.
Right.
So,
Yes. Well, that's an interesting way to think about it that I had never thought about. But I do think that for me, I've been circling around this topic for years. I wrote my master's thesis about it. It was because I was young and wanted to be, very daring in my titles. It was called The Feminine Divine Spells, Sex, and Magic. There's, this tendency to equate it with, the occult or witchcraft or whatever, in some cases, kind of these earth religions that were very old. But the true origin of it is, I was raised in a Christian tradition of my interest is that I was raised in a Christian tradition that, very much put women as secondary citizens within the church. And so I kind of from an early age was not, to your point of it's only something you can give away. I was not willing to give that away. And so that's probably when I had that's probably the main reason I, left the church that I was raised in and embarked on this journey of trying to understand other perspectives, was because of that. So,
wow, you must have processed that at an early age. I don't think I would have been aware of that, consciously.
yeah, by 16, I was out of the church. And I just remember sitting, in church and hearing certain things for sure, and thinking, why can't I do that? It was just very instinctual for me that I would reject that. But then also, just seeing the fact that women served in the church, but never in areas of leadership. And so that really, bothered me from a really early age. So anyway, we'll talk all about that. But That's why I'm so passionate about this topic.
Oh, well, clearly.
Yeah. And a lot of people are passionate about this topic in many different ways. So,
Yes.
we'll acknowledge that. I think that some people perceive it as very threatening to some of the orthodoxy that's out there. And, we'll talk about
Silliness.
that.
Silliness. Such silly.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. So let's dive in. I know that we talked a lot about archetypes and some of the ancient goddesses and all of those things in terms of origin. So, is there anything for you? Like, how did you come to this topic? Why is it of interest to you?
Um, it's just a lived mythology for me, right? It's just all the aspects of being female that I wouldn't trade for anything in the world. I think just and again, equal but different, men and women. This is not like a men bashing thing by any stretch. But I just appreciate the gifts that I have just by being female. And I did not grow up in the church like you did. I mean, I dropped in occasionally in the summers down in Kerrville, but I didn't actually come to the church till I had my first kid and I was like 30. So I didn't have any of, that kind of orthodox baggage, I guess, you would say. But the women in my life were some of the most powerful, in control, life-giving people. And it just was a natural archetype that I just saw played out over and over and over. And so it was never a questioned thing, and I personally, and I guess I'm a pretty lucky girl, I don't feel like I've ever been discriminated in the workplace because I was female. So it's just not something that I've seen. And then when I got to the church, I took a role in it and it was welcome. So I've just had a very different lived experience. And I've just always appreciated and enjoyed the perspective that being female brings for me. But I did learn, and you probably know this, but from some of my Orthodox Jewish friends on like why men wear the kippah, the yarmulke, and the women don't.
No, I don't know this.
There's it's not biblical, so it's rabbinical, it's mishra, it's extra biblical. But the tradition is that men need to be reminded of God. They need something on them to remind them that there's something above them. But women don't. Women have been given an extra understanding that men have not been given. That's why they don't, now they have other obligations. There's more to it than that. But I was like, yeah, that's right. That sounds just about right. So, but my interest in it comes, mythologically and just sort of understanding the larger narratives about females and women and, their presence throughout history, whether factual or, like I said, mythological. What I find so fascinating is before the gods had faces or names or there was ever a myth, there was woman. And when you think about what was the first worshiped thing, it was woman, right? So you go back to those, they call them those Paleolithic Venuses.
Mm-hmm.
And with the exaggerated femininity, right? Like the Brazilian butt lift and the big boobs, and they're always pregnant, and you're just like, wow, right? That was a venerated object before even the cave paintings, right? And so when you think about it, woman was, the first worshipped object or the first worshipped thing or, venerated object. So I just find that fascinating. And that's what I love to talk about.
Yeah. I think the Venus of Willendorf was the first time I saw that was in my freshman year of college in art appreciation or art history 101. Yeah. And it opened my mind to how women had been represented in ancient times, for sure. And if you think about it, women, with the fact that women give birth and our cycles are aligned with, lunar cycles, and the fact that we were in agrarian society for so long, it makes sense that the fact that women, were of nature in a way that was distinct, that this would be venerated or held up or held sacred in cultures. So,
yeah. And this great quote from this book called The Chalice and the Blade. So I'm going to kind of butcher it, I'm sure. But what woman does with her body, the earth does with seasons, right? To live close to a woman was to live close to life itself. And so when you think about earth magic, right? Like what's happening in the seasons, to your point, in the cycles, and the moon disappears and comes back, and the sun moves across the sky, and seasons come and go, very similar to women's magic, right? The cycles, birth, menstruation, menopause, like all the things. So you're kind of looking at the wonder of nature, and you're looking at woman and you're like, wow, there's a lot of parallel, a lot of synergy, a lot of harmony, and, a lot of, just a magic of the imagination that comes with that. And like you said, in the agricultural societies, you watch the earth. You plant a seed, it grows, it dies, the seeds fall back to the ground, the cycle begins all over again. So just the sort of symbiotic rhythm, right? So women magic, if you want to call it that, is very cyclical, right? That's the rhythm. There's just this, circular cyclical rhythm to it that isn't really just about agriculture, but it's life. It's again, moon, it's the sun, it's the planet spinning, it's the seasons, it's everything.
Yeah. And as you brought up, female archetypes, from the maiden to the crone, very much align with, that seasonal view of life. And so, you see those pop up in everything, right? A lot of the stories we tell, the narratives over time, whether they're, old stories or more modern narratives, you see those archetypes come to the forefront. And, in more patriarchal societies, some of the more negative aspects are emphasized sometimes, right? So like the harlot kind of thing, or, the temptress or whatever,
These definitions that are imposed upon us from men from the outside versus, an expression of what, femininity is all about. And if you think about these early societies where women were venerated, they were often the priestesses, they were the keepers of the knowledge, they understood the agriculture, and men's role, their place becomes, much more hunting, right? Which we know, but they also become the architects of society. So woman is nature, she is earth, she is the rhythm. And then men get sort of, okay, what are we going to do? All right, we're going to build the towns, we're going to build the societies, we're going to be the keepers of sort of that aspect of life. And, you look at even some of the cave paintings, and there are not really a lot of women painted in the caves, right? It's the hunters, and it's the other venerated, worshipped objects, which are animals, right? We're equally, venerated in some cultures. And you're like, well, where are the women? You're like, well, the women are the tomb. They're the cave that the men go into for the ritual and come out. So, this whole echo of birth and death is played out, right, with the men, but in their own way, in their own contributions, to society, in addition to, the hunting, if you will.
I hear you. I think I have to think through the, well, we're talking clearly about, how the origins, right? The origins of this idea of sacred feminine and how it plays out. And I always struggle to not put my modern perspective on it, in terms of the point you just made, but I do want to mention that there were women leaders who were probably more instrumental in some,
Oh, absolutely.
like foundation of Christianity, all kinds of things. But yes, I think it's perspective, and we're bringing opposite perspectives. I'm bringing the fighter perspective, and you're bringing like this. I'm bringing an outside in perspective to this. You're bringing it inside out, and I think the distinction that I probably want to draw is that you can appreciate the intrinsic feminine attributes or power without boxing women into those exclusively. It's probably the best way to say it.
Yeah. I mean, I think my brain is very much in the mythology of the woman and the power of the woman. And I think I'm coming at it from the past, and maybe you're coming at it from the future, and like kind of what's happened, which is what makes this such an interesting topic.
Mhm.
And me, my brain is very linear. I want to start at the beginning and end at the end, and you're jumping all over, which is great. But I think when we think about what's gotten lost and what's gotten challenged, and I would love to move on to kind of how we got wiped out basically by the Hebrews, is when you think about what are the three fundamental gifts or roles or functions of the feminine divine, right? It is life giver, right? We are the givers of life. We're also life receivers, death, right? That full circle. But also as a part of that, the third function is transformation, right? And so this power, whether it's spiritual, it's physical, right? That's where this whole idea of the muse comes from. So those three functions are just the innate gifts, roles of the divine feminine that I think we still hold today. So,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Before we talk about how we were erased from history, or at least minimized in history, I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the ancient goddesses and, that we know about. So when I was maybe 7 years old, my best friend down the street for Halloween decided to be Wonder Woman, and I really wanted to be Wonder Woman, but she had already taken that, and I could not be Wonder Woman.
only
And
one
so,
block.
yeah, and so there was a popular cartoon at the time, I believe, about Isis.
Oh yeah.
And so I was Isis, and my mom made me a costume and the whole thing. I remember this. But Isis was an Egyptian goddess of magic, healing, motherhood, resurrection, right? So as a child in the 70s, someone had tapped into that myth and brought it back as a cartoon. And I was like, okay, well, if I can't be Wonder Woman, I'll be Isis for Halloween, right? We have Sumerian goddesses like Inanna, love, sex, war, justice, transformation, to your point. I've always been fascinated by the Hindu goddess Kali, because she is both destruction and liberation, and she's like a very, very powerful
Don't mess with
goddess.
Kali.
Yeah,
Don't mess with Kali.
and the way she's represented in Hinduism is frankly kind of frightening. If you just Google it and look at one of the representations of her, but she's fierce.
Yeah.
The Greeks and the Romans, most of us studied in school, so you've got equal representation, male, masculine, and feminine, usually in those, and everything from Aphrodite to Hera to Diana, etc. So no shortage of representation in Greek and Roman mythology for sure. And then Celtic, there's Celtic traditions as well. So Bridget, and in Buddhism, Kuan Yin, which I had not really heard much about, but in the Chinese Buddhist tradition, there's, representation there with compassion, mercy, healing, etc. So there's no shortage of examples to point to, and those old stories, narratives, inspirations keep recircling and being re-represented in culture. So at some level, there's familiarity with many of those.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what makes mythology. It transcends consciousness, right? It is the meta narrative that gets reflected back over and over, right, throughout time. I named my daughter Bridget after Saint Bridget. She's somebody near and dear to our hearts. We do the Feast of Saint Bridget every February here. And Green Tara is one of my one of the meditations, the Green Tara's meditation about compassion in action, which is something I need to be conscious of. So yeah, I 100%, I think that those original goddesses, the way we think about them, the legacy continues, and you can draw a straight line, which makes a lot of people uncomfortable, but I wish that it wouldn't, from Isis to the Virgin Mary. not only in the story and the role and being the queen of heaven and the star of the sea and the mother of God, Theotokos, and right, all of this, all the way down to the icons, right? So if you look at statues and sculptures of Isis with Horus on her lap, and you look at an icon of the Virgin Mary, you're like copycat, plagiarism. They're, I mean, they're virtually identical. And, we can talk about how we got pushed out. I know we're going to get there. But we didn't want to let her go. We didn't want to let the goddess go. There's something about our humanity that doesn't want to let her go. And she couldn't stay, because of the Hebrew take on the role of women, etc. She couldn't stay in her powerful form. We had to find another role for her. And that's the role that she got, so, which I think is really interesting. I have a dear friend who's Mormon. We used to talk about this stuff all the time. And in their cosmology, Sophia, or wisdom, she's real, and she is the wife of God, and she is protected and kept, out of the paparazzi by God, right? She's a very sacred, precious thing, so different religions to different degrees still, embrace the goddess in a more overt way.
Yes, she persists. She cannot be completely eradicated from those traditions. But yeah, let's talk about the shift, in the early days of Christianity. Jesus was a bit of a radical. He definitely preached inclusiveness and compassion, and there are countless stories of his affiliation or interaction with women. And, the two Marys being the most prominent in the Christian canon. And of those two, to your point, Mother Mary, losing a little bit of her perceived power in how things evolved and the way she was represented, as more emphasis on her purity and her servitude. But clearly, she is the bridge between humanity and the divine. And that wasn't taken away as things evolved. So, but the other Mary, much more maligned. Oh, Mary Magdalene. We're Mary Magdalene.
We have to do a whole Mary Magdalene, because she's such a badass bitch. Do you know what I mean? And I don't think she cares that she's maligned at all.
Yeah, I mean, she's referred to as the apostle to the apostles by a lot of scholars. She, at the resurrection, Jesus revealed himself to two women, and he charged Mary Magdalene with conveying his, the fact that he had risen to the apostles. So this is much more your area, I would say, because this is old. I'm digging way back in my memory for some of this, although I've read more recently, of course, about it. But, there were the prominence of women in the Gospels is still there. It's just been slightly altered.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So if we kind of go back to before the Hebrews, let's say, right? There's this idea known as syncretism, which is, hey, that God you call Zeus, we call whatever, right? Oh, we all worship the same gods. They just, the fractal reflects differently in our culture. We call it this, you call it that, right? And the Hebrews were having none of that, right? So here's a culture that is, moved away from agriculture, much more into hunting, much more male dominated. Nature is matriarchal, society is patriarchal, and it was, the patriarchy. And, the goddesses, whether it's, I think it's in Kings and Jeremiah, are referred to of the other cultures as the abomination. Now, abomination gets used a lot in the Old Testament for a lot of different things, but one of them is like for Ashtoreth, just, these goddesses, they are the abomination. And oh, by the way, the gods you worship, not the gods we worship, very different, right? So that was a real sharp shift in thought, and very much the culture that Christ came out of, even though, to your point, he didn't really walk and talk that way. That was the cultural lens through which everything got interpreted. And obviously so much beauty comes from the Bible and Judaism, and where would we be without it? But too many crickets, right? Like, just let's just push her on out, And the first woman mentioned Lilith. Let's make her a demon, and then
Hmm.
let's forget about Sophia and wisdom, and let's just push her out. And who is this female voice? You don't need to worry about it. Look over here, don't look over there, right? And so that became like a real shift, a real fundamental shift that started a lot of the walk away from the goddess, right? So
Yeah, and when I did a little bit of research for this, it happened over basically about a 400-year period. So, when Christ was alive and walking and talking and interfacing and all those good things, it was a little bit more egalitarian, and then over time, it became, especially by the time you get to the 4th century, it becomes much more controlled and canonized and all of those good things. So I love that you brought up Lilith as well, because she was made into this threat to the patriarchy, etc. This woman who would not behave, which and I'm of an age where there was a whole music festival called Lilith Fair that was like female artists every year, and a reclamation of that idea of the rebellious
well, I
female.
think the best resurrection of Lilith was Frasier and his ex
Oh,
being Lilith. I don't know if you love that show as much as I love that
yes.
show, but I mean, way to have a wink and a smile with it, right?
Yes, that was a nice little nod. But the Council of Nicaea is mentioned a lot, which was in 325, and it didn't really lock in our canon in terms of what the New Testament looks like, but it did focus on the nature of Christ, not Scripture. It did set the stage for more doctrinal uniformity. So it kind of set the stage for this idea of, we're going to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of, what we're, the texts that we're focused on, what truly is represented in the New Testament. And so there were things like the Gnostic Gospels. There is a Gospel of Mary and a Gospel of Thomas and some others that were not used or referenced as broadly across the Christian culture, and those were excluded when everything was formalized. So in some cases, women were excluded at that point. And then the first known list of the exact 27 books of the New Testament that we have today was 367. So there was, I'm going to butcher this name, Athanasius's Festal Letter. And he called these texts, the 27 books, canonized, and that no others should be added. And then by 393 and 397, we have some synods where they've officially ratified the 27-book New Testament canon in the Latin-speaking Western Church. And eventually that's, affirmed by broader church traditions, councils, etc. And, there have been some changes over time. I think it was in 2016 that the Pope recognized Mary Magdalene and kind of reset the perception of her, because she had been characterized, shortly around that same time, I think around 400, as a prostitute versus an apostle and all of these things. And some of that reclamation has started to happen in the last, 10, 15 years or so, in terms of how she's viewed within the church. So,
yeah. You know what I have to say? Canon Schmanon. Okay. The Council of Nicaea was politics at its finest, right? And a bunch of men sitting around and deciding, right, how they're going to draw the borderlines of their empire. Okay. And Gospel of Thomas is one of my favorite gospels. We'll have to do a whole episode on that. It is
okay.
It is absolutely.
I've never read it, so I'd love to.
Yeah. But ignoring things like, do you know why Constantine became a Christian and why henceforth that whole region became Christian? because of his mother. His mother was a believer, and she's like, I want you to do this, and I want you, she liked to collect relics and all that anyway. So yeah, once again, behind every man who thinks he's making a profound decision is usually a woman, right? So the stories like that are never ending, right? To your point of, how was Christ supported during his lifetime? Often by women, often by very wealthy, successful women who actually did have some freedoms in the culture. And so, I love that, the popes decided to say Mary wasn't a whore. Okay, thank you so much. I can read. I did not conflate the passages like you guys did. But we're going to deem her worthy now. It's just, to me, the silliness is it's never ending. However, that said, I do like to see her get a boost, to see women get a public boost. Like, that helps, because there's a lot of people who, look to a spiritual leader, right? They don't look inside, which is where all the real answers are, but they do look to spiritual leaders. And without that, that blessing, that endorsement, they're uncomfortable maybe believing something that they feel, and I kind of struggle with all of it. And that's why, I love being Lutheran, because we just love to chew this stuff up. You know what I mean? Like, maybe one of the downfalls of Lutheranism, which has many wonderful things, is we love mental candy, and we will just debate and challenge, and, and that's not necessarily where the magic happens, though it is tons of fun. It is tons of fun to sit around and talk about this stuff. So
yes, a more intellectual pursuit, right? In terms of understanding and debating, and debate is not always encouraged in every church, for sure. So,
yeah. Well, what I wish, and how much I love, where's my book? Joseph Campbell. And if you haven't read, I know you have, but anybody who's watching, Goddesses, he never actually wrote a book on goddesses. These are a collection of his essays from his classes that the Institute has put together. But what I find, I don't know, maybe hurts my heart a little bit, is there aren't real powerful female mythologies living out today. A lot of scholars would say we need new mythologies, right? We need mythologies that are planetary, that are cosmic, that are, bigger. But we really have lost, you talked about the goddesses, Greek and Celtic and Hindu and all that. We've really lost that here. And, for, I think, a man to try and determine what kind of man he wants to be, he has a lot to draw from. There are archetypes, big or small, that the culture can offer up, but it's much harder for women. That is definitely one thing, one helper maybe on the journey that we've lost, which, kind of reinforces this inner voice. I think you have to kind of listen to your inner voice to find your way. It's like, what kind of female am I? Like, what is my archetype? What is my mythological narrative? Like, what am I living out? Everybody gets to live out their own, but makes it a little bit harder, I think.
Yes, for sure. I think that we were seeing, in my lifetime, in your lifetime, we've definitely seen more female-driven narratives in, like, pop culture, etc. They've emerged slowly. We're seeing a little bit of a backlash to that right now, I think. If you look at, like, the Avengers, it's Black Widow. That's what you got. Like, there's always, like, the token female.
There you go.
Yeah. So, there's, it's interesting, because I do think that, I was a huge Star Wars fan as a kid, and I somewhat identified with Princess Leia, but I identified more with Han Solo. So, women when you don't have a clear female example to emulate, sometimes you just adopt what's available, for
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, without making commentary on social culture, women have, fallen into sort of the male trajectory, that male arc of what success looks like. And we're different creatures, and do whatever makes you happy in life. Everyone has that freedom to follow their own bliss. But you got to be pretty strong and quite the maverick to create your own trajectory and, not kind of feel the pressure that society puts on its definition of success and its definition of the roles. And I think even women, we do it to each other. What do you mean you don't work? You stay at home? And then it's like, what do you mean you work? You don't take care of your kids? It's almost like this can't win kind of paradox or trap that you can't get out of. And that's when I feel like the fact that we don't have mythologies, or we've lost our mythologies, or we've lost that, female magic, if you will, you can just see it. I mean, when you're reaching outside for something to justify your life, well, you've missed, you know what I mean? Then I hate to say it, but you're off the track. Get back on the path, like come back, just do what your heart tells you to do,
Yeah. I do think I did not anticipate that we would come from such different places in this discussion. I thought it was likely in that, we had very different religious experiences as young people, and in many ways opposite, right? Yeah. You came to religion later in life, and I don't want to say I had it shoved down my throat, but I had it shoved down my throat very early. So I remember when I was marrying my husband, we wanted a non-religious ceremony, but a good friend of ours was a minister. And so we asked her if she would do it. And she really struggled with that. How do I do a ceremony that isn't overtly religious? Because that's what she's used to. And at one point she had, outlined it for us, and there was a prayer. And I said, "Oh, I don't know. How do you feel about this?" And my soon-to-be husband said, "Well, I'm fine with it. I don't have all the baggage that you have." I was like, "Oh, yeah, I do. I have a lot of baggage." That's fair. And we had the prayer because it's a blessing. And I was fine with a blessing because we can all use a blessing. But let's go back to, the whole evolution was, I think also I did a little reading around how it was some of the Jewish mystic examples in Jewish mysticism, and then also early Christian tradition. There was more emphasis on, with women in the texts, on a direct relationship with God. And that was also not something the church was as excited about or wanted to reinforce. And so those two things were tied together.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it goes back to we started in the beginning talking about the kippah or the yarmulke. It's like, there's been this underlying acknowledgement that there's something women have or know or are connected in a way that just, again, equal but different, that makes them different. And when your focus is power and being in power, then you're threatened, right? So I mean, that's just kind of a reoccurring theme, not only in society, but, within the church. The church is made up of people, and we're all flawed people. So it again just sort of echoes through time.
Yeah, absolutely. Then you look at how it's represented, and obviously, well, you have familiarity with a number of traditions. I have dabbled or read about a number of them, but haven't had a lived experience of most in the last, many, many years, several decades. But, I think that even I have, friends who are ministers, and in what I would perceive as fairly egalitarian denominations, and almost exclusively they are women's ministers or children's ministry. They oversee children's ministry. So I have a very visceral reaction to that.
Yeah, I understand that. And again, I consider myself, well, you know what I consider. If somebody asks me what I am, it's the priority changes, but somewhere along the way, I'm, a Buddhist, Celtic, Franciscan, Lutheran, or the flow changes depending on the mood, right? But in the Lutheran church, like we have female, we call them pastors or whatever. We don't have the hierarchy of the priest and all that stuff. And so again, my lived experience has been different, than yours, which obviously shades the way I see things. So I rage against other stuff. I rage against original sin and I rage against other things, But in terms of having practical experience, I do believe, my opinion, that you have to pick a path and go all the way down it to have the full experience, right? I don't know. Do you ever watch that movie, Nightmare Before Christmas? Love that movie. Love that movie. Watch that movie. Yeah, every Christmas. Okay, and the scene out in the forest where there's the different trees and there's the different holidays, and you see the doors that take you into the tree, I think of religion that way. Like I imagine myself in a forest. It's all the same thing, right? It's the golden thread. It's all the same thing. And there's, you can pick a door, or you can stand outside all the doors and just talk about and observe them all. I personally, for me, I think you have to pick a path and follow it all the way to have the full experience. And that's what I think the purpose is to have an experience with God, right? Not just intellectualize it, which is so much fun. Love doing that, but to have the experience. And so for me, that's just what I've learned in my life, and why I've picked the path. And I meditate most days to Green Tara, who's a bodhisattva. But it all starts with my Christian base. Like I got there late, but for whatever reason, it took the most territory in my heart, like it just, for whatever reason, just got in there. So I'm rambling now. I'll stop, but
no, I think that's great. And it also brings up a good point in that, I definitely don't want to end this episode with the perception that I'm just wholeheartedly across the board opposed to Christianity. I'm certainly not. I don't identify as a Christian, but I definitely see the value in Jesus' teachings. When I got my master's, the Gospels were part of, my study. I am appreciative of the role it plays in other people's lives. And I do think that there are people who very clearly live their faith and are an amazing representative of their faith. And I've known people like that. I have a friend who's Mormon who I feel like he embodies his faith in a way that's he's a beacon in the world. People are drawn to him. Okay. And similarly, I have friends who embody their, preferred denomination or view on Christianity in a way that is clearly not only works for them, but is also very attractive in terms of, hey, there's something here. There's something that is giving this person peace and empathy and all of these wonderful traits. And so to me, that's the way to be in the world if you want to proselytize in a way, just live the experience and be a beacon that draws curiosity. Hey, you seem like you maybe have it figured out. Tell me more about this, right? Versus feeling this need to force views on other people, right?
That doesn't work. There's a great Martin Luther quote. He's like, preach the gospel at all times, only when necessary, use words. So it's like exactly what you're saying. And to be clear, like, I think to your point, some people are amazing representatives and they are these beacons, and I am drawn to those people. Like, it's amazing. I am not one of those people. I am here because I need it. Like, I need it so badly to function as a more enlightened human. Like I'm one of these, I see my shortcomings at every turn, and I'm like, I want to be better, I want to grow, I want to move forward on the path, like I want to be more about love, I want to let fear go. Like it's a conscious journey that I'm on. And that's, yeah, and it's a conscious journey, and I need it.
Don't we all? I mean, come on. I'm always suspicious of people who are like, I've got it locked down. I have it. Who has it locked down? No one. If you think you do, you're tempting fate. Just,
it's like Alan Watts. I was listening to some lecture he gave, and it was like, we're all hypnotized by Maya, like all the bullshit that's just swirling around us, and the second you start believing it, right? Like, come on, it's crackers. And again, I said it, but I do believe it. I think that everybody has to answer their own call. I think everybody gets their own call, and they're all equal. The golden thread, like if you start comparing, across cultures, you will find fundamental tenets that resonate, and you will find stories that have been told for thousands and thousands of years. Guess what? It's not new to the Bible. I mean, Moses getting put in the basket is not new. King Sargon, that's what happened to him in Samaria before the Bible was ever, right? And if that freaks some people out, it gives me great comfort. I feel like we'll just call it God. He's been trying to tell us the same thing. He's been very consistent. He's been a good, loving parent, right? Just keeps repeating the message over and over. And it's very easy for me to see that. I realize it's not for everyone. Again, probably because I came to the church later in life, and I, wasn't taught otherwise. And that's what
and I think that that's an important distinction, because I think that many people are taught this is the only way to think about this, and this is the truth, and there is no other truth except for this truth. So as they get older and become exposed to more things, it's threatening to their sense of identity, because their sense of identity is so closely aligned to the how precise or true what they were taught was. And so they're not open to that reassurance of the universality of a lot of these themes. We talked in an earlier episode about, for me, my North Star is the golden rule, and that's represented in every major religion. So to me, that's comforting. It's clearly universal.
Yeah. So. Yeah, absolutely. And it's comforting for me.
So I think similarly, the sacred feminine, as I learned more about how women have been represented, and my master's thesis was a little bit more on how that association of earth magic, became affiliated with witchcraft and the occult, and I see that still to this day. I know someone who recently became a born again Christian and made a big deal about throwing out her tarot cards and crystals and all that good stuff, because now she's found the truth. And I'm not a big tarot or crystal person, but I thought that was maybe a little extreme,
because those are expensive. Those aren't cheap.
They aren't cheap, but hey, more power to her in terms of her journey and where she is. But I also think that, that association and affiliation, I mean, we could talk about the Salem witch trials and all of that, but, it was a way to demonize, some of these, pagan rituals, festivals, traditions, women who were herbalists, and knew how to use that power and knowledge to heal people, were perceived as a threat, etc. So anyway, that's what led me down that path. But as I learned more about it, it was reassuring to see all of these, positive representations that have been suppressed or distorted, and understand more about the history of them.
Yeah. Yeah. 100. I mean, absolutely. And I don't think she's gone. We're not gone. We're still here.
Right.
And I think the role that women play is a divine role. and in whatever expression or capacity that is, right? Because it's so multidimensional, and just leaning into it, just, like leaning into being female. um there's just a whole world of insight and truth and depth there that is a gift. It really is a gift. And I would wish that for all women, whether you have kids, you don't have kids, you work, you don't work, you're a Christian or you're not a Christian. Like, it transcends all of that. The gift transcends all of that. And, just by showing up in the world, we're still working our magic. We're still magic. And, I find as I get older, I am believing that more and more and more, right? And leaning into that more and more and more. And I don't know, maybe it's part of the aging curve, but I expected to lose my ego and become this altruistic, which maybe a little bit that's happening, not as much as probably should, but I just feel like the feminine side is just exploding. And I also find that I appreciate men who understand what women bring, right? Versus some of the more pedantic sort of, like, I don't know, I'll say societally oriented men. So it's actually becoming a differentiator for me. And when I meet somebody, it's become like a criteria or an assessment of where their head is on women.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the social media phenomena of trad wives, and some of these pockets that are glorifying traditional roles, which, to your point, are fine if that's what someone chooses. It's, as long as they're not forced or limited.
Yeah.
Great, go for it. But also, where you have people in leadership who are supporting the ideas that the 19th Amendment should be repealed and all these other things, are very, you see those balloons being floated a little bit more than they have in the past. So we're going to talk about that when we talk about power, which I feel like we've already started to skip ahead to. And what I'm learning, this was not intended to be my own personal therapy session.
It's okay.
But thank you, because it definitely has been. Because I think that because of my lived experience and journey, and I've known this for a long time, I feel like it's true that I also feel more empowered in terms of my femininity, and have learned to properly value intuition and some of the other, pieces of the puzzle that come with that. But I think for a good portion of my life, I pretty much played by the masculine power handbook. And, we've both had careers where that was probably beneficial in some circumstances. And I had a very strong example in my father. And so I think that I identified more with that, especially early in my life, in terms of how to move through the world and how to be taken seriously, and how to view myself. So I had no idea that this would be so triggering for me. It totally has been, because I love your perspective. It's so, this, and I think that I do embody this more than I ever have, which is this innate confidence that is not adversarial, right? You're not in there scrapping. You're just like, of course. This is how it is. This is who I am.
I mean, at this point, it is what it is. You know what I'm saying? It's like, I think it was at Tolstoy, you have to just get in the boat on the river and trust that the river will take you where you're supposed to go. And, I think that applies to a lot of things. And it's hard. I mentioned before that I'm, hashtag control sober for about 8 years or so now, giving up control, which I realize is just one baby step on the path to real surrender. That takes some some balls. I'll just say, like, real surrender takes some balls, but we're getting there. We're getting there. But what else is coming up for you? Like
I think we're going to talk a lot about it in Power this second episode, because I'm now going to have to think really hard about how I want to approach that discussion, because I do, I mean, I think we've had similar experiences. We've both been leaders from a career standpoint, and leadership, I've definitely noticed that leadership, not always, but frequently looks different when carried by a woman. And I would say that I've moved through most of those changes instinctually, and I don't know that I've sat down to really think about what has driven them and how they've evolved, or like intellectualize some of it. I think it's just been that I've learned to be less controlling. I've learned to lead in a different way over time in my various roles as a mom, as a woman in the workforce, etc. But I think it definitely has a fighting edge to it for sure. And I'm going to think a lot about this before we talk about Power.
Can't wait.
Yeah.
Can't wait to do the next one. Just to echo kind of what you're saying, it's definitely an evolution. And I think I did my early career approach it very much with like a male mythology, or a mindset. So much so that when I had my first child, and I brought him into the office, and I was like, had him there and I don't know what I was doing. One of the women I work with, she's like, I just never thought you were the type to have a baby. And I was like, the fuck you talking about? Like, what? Like it and so it just kind of speaks to how even women look at each other and they're like, oh, well, she's on an aggressive trajectory, then she's not feminine. It's like, what? Like it's just just odd. So people culture that throws stuff at you, just these curveballs that give you cause for pause or a moment of disconnect. I just remember thinking, what? Like it's just, so it is a challenge, and it is, I just don't care so much anymore, I guess, I just don't care so much.
Well, I do think the Gen X Western woman is one of the most radical generations of women to ever be raised, and not always outwardly, but but in terms of the opportunity we've been afforded and the position it's put us in relation to our culture has been unique. So.
Yep. Okay. Well, I think maybe we should wrap this session.
Let's do it. I got to go think. I have so much to think about now, Susan. And also, I mean, clearly you've spent a ton of time diving into, a lot of these traditions and these areas. And what I'm realizing is I do want to spend more time going further down a path to understand it better. So I'm trying to, I'll think about what that looks like for me.
Yeah. I tell my kids, or it's like, just imagine yourself walking down the beach and you just pick up the seashells that you like, you just pick up the things that work for you, but everybody gets to do that for themselves. But anyway.
Oh, I like that. I like it. I like it. Well, and I think it's interesting because, I have people that are close to me who would say, you don't get to pick and choose. You don't get to pick and choose. This is the tradition, and you either buy into it or you don't. And I don't know anyone honestly who believes in every single aspect of whatever religion they practice, what they
well, and
express.
What really chaps my ass about that kind of thinking is, I always want to say, how big is your God? How big is he? Is he big enough that you believe that everything is as it's supposed to be and all will be well? Or do you imagine it's like so arrogant to think you can know what's going on in God's mind, know what's right and what's wrong? It's arrogant, it's unimaginative, it's disrespectful. Like, I'm just like, dude. Next.
How big is your God? Is he big enough to be a she?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right? I just sometimes, anyway, now I'm not being a good person. Now I'm being very judgmental. But that kind of stuff just sets me off.
Well, I'm glad that before we wrapped up this episode, I could bring you to my side. I'm glad I could get you out of this like peace, love, and harmony, Earth Mother vibe.
I'll be
and
back.
over here scrapping with me because that's what I like. But you have time to get back in that mindset before we talk about power for sure.
Okay.
And
yes.
I'm looking forward to it. And then, the third topic in this series is pleasure, which I can also not wait to talk about. I think that is really going to be juicy and interesting.
Indeed it shall. All right, my friend. Well, thank you so much for the conversation.
Yeah, it was great as always.
All right, we'll talk to you.
It was very Sacredish discussion.
Ish. Emphasis on ish.
Yes. We're going hard on the ish, guys.